I was sitting in my garden just last week watching a butterfly emerge from its chrysalis. For hours, I witnessed its struggle, this delicate creature fighting to break free from the only home it had ever known. And I'll tell you something that might surprise you. And my first instinct was to help it, to reach out and carefully tear away that chrysalis to make its journey easier. But I didn't. And do you know why? Because that struggle, that very difficulty we so often try to avoid in life, was exactly what the butterfly needed to strengthen its wings for flight. Without that resistance, without that challenge, it would never have developed the strength. How many of us are like that butterfly right now? Struggling, fighting against our own chrysalis of fear, wondering why everything has to be so hard? Maybe you're sitting here today feeling the weight of a dream you're afraid to pursue. Perhaps you're carrying the burden of a what if that keeps you awake at night. Or maybe you're simply tired of living life in the safety of your comfort zone, knowing deep down that you were meant for something more. I see you. I feel you. And more importantly, I understand you. Let me share something personal with you. Back in 1976, I was a counselor with a secure job, a predictable routine, and what everyone else would call a successful life. But every morning I would look in the mirror and see someone who wasn't truly. I had this burning desire to reach more people, to share messages of hope and transformation on a larger scale. But fear whispered in my ear every single day, who do you think you are? You can't leave a secure job. What if you fail? What will people? Those whispers were loud, my friends, so loud that they almost won, almost. But here's what I realized, and what I want you to understand deep in your soul today, fear isn't your enemy. It's not something to be conquered or eliminated. Fear is simply a sign that you're standing on the edge of something important. It's your soul's way of saying, pay attention. This matters. Think about that for a moment. When was the last time you felt afraid of something that didn't matter to you? We don't feel fear about things we don't care about. Fear shows up precisely because we're contemplating something meaningful, something that could change our lives. I want you to do something with me right now. Close your eyes. Yes, right here, right now. Close your eyes and think about the biggest fear that's holding you back. Maybe it's leaving a job that doesn't fulfill you. Maybe it's starting that business you've been dreaming about. Maybe it's finally writing that book that's been living in your heart for years. Whatever it is, hold that fear in your mind. Now, here's the question that changed my life, and I believe it can change yours. What if fear isn't trying to stop you, but rather trying to show you exactly where you need to go? You see, we've been conditioned to view fear as a stop sign, when in reality, it's more like a compass. It points directly to the areas of our lives where the greatest growth and opportunity await. Every single person who has ever achieved something meaningful has felt fear. The difference is they learned to see it differently. When I left my secure position to pursue my calling as a speaker and author, I was terrified. I had 4 children to support, a mortgage to pay, and absolutely no guarantee of success. But I had something more powerful than fear. I had faith. Not just religious faith, though that was part of it, but faith in the natural order of things. Faith in the principle that when we align ourselves with our highest purpose, the universe conspires to help us. Let me tell you something that most people don't realize about fear. Fear is actually a product of our imagination. Think about that. Fear is us using our creative capacity to imagine negative outcomes that haven't happened yet. And if we can use our imagination to create fear, couldn't we use that same powerful faculty to create? This isn't positive thinking or wishful dreaming. This is about understanding a fundamental truth about human consciousness. We become what we think about most of the time. Earl Nightingale said that back in 1956, and it transformed my understanding of how our minds work. Today, I want to share with you 3 fundamental truths about fear that will transform how you approach every opportunity in your life. First, fear is not a wall. It's a doorway. Every time you feel fear, it's life inviting you to step through to something greater. Just like that butterfly in my garden, the struggle against fear is strengthening you for flight. Second, fear is always future-based. It never exists in the present moment. When you're fully present, fully engaged in the now, fear cannot exist. This is why small children who live completely in the present are so fearless. They haven't learned to project their thoughts into an imaginary future. And third, this is perhaps the most important, if fear and faith cannot coexist in the same moment. Just like light and darkness cannot occupy the same space, you cannot be in a state of fear and a state of faith simultaneously. You get to choose which one you'll entertain. The choice between fear and faith isn't something you make once. It's a choice you make moment by moment, day by day. And each time you choose faith over fear, you strengthen that muscle of courage within you. I remember standing backstage before my first major speaking engagement. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my notes. My heart was racing, and that familiar voice of fear was screaming in my ear. You're not ready for this. You're going to fail. Run away while you still can. But in that moment, I made a choice. Instead of letting fear be my master, I let it be my teacher. I asked myself, what is this fear trying to tell me? What opportunity for growth is it pointing toward? And do you know what I realized? The fear wasn't trying to stop me. It was trying to prepare me. It was heightening my senses, sharpening my focus, and mobilizing my energy for something important. Once I understood this, everything changed. I stepped onto that stage, not because the fear had gone away, but because I had changed my relationship with it, and that's exactly what I want to help you do today. You see, every single person in this room has a unique gift to share with the world. But so many of these gifts remain wrapped up in the packaging of fear, stored away in the attic of someday. I want you to really think about that word, someday. It's a word that fear loves to use. I'll do it someday. I'll start someday. I'll be ready someday. But here's the truth that transformed my life, and I believe it can transform yours. Someday is not a day of the week. It never shows up on any calendar. It's just a clever disguise that fear wears to keep us comfortable in our discomfort. Let me share something with you that happened in 1977. I was giving a small workshop in a church basement in Detroit. There were maybe 15 people there. After the workshop, a woman came up to me with tears in her eyes. She said, "Dr. Dyer, I've been waiting for 20 years to start painting again. I used to love it, but someone told me I wasn't good enough, and I believed them. 20 years. 2 decades of allowing someone else's opinion to silence her passion. 2 decades of someday." But here's what makes this story beautiful. She went home that night and painted for 6 straight hours. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait until she felt ready. She didn't wait for fear to go away. She simply decided that someday had arrived. Now, I want you to understand something crucial about this moment. Nothing external had changed in her life. She had the same job, the same responsibilities, the same 24 hours in her day. What changed was internal. She simply made a different choice about how to interpret her fear. Brings me to a fundamental principle I want you to grasp. Fear is not a fact. It's an interpretation. And we always have the power to choose a different interpretation. Think about water for a moment. To a person dying of thirst in the desert, water is life itself. To someone who can't swim, that same water might represent death. The water hasn't changed, only the interpretation has changed. Your fears work exactly the same way. The thing you're afraid of, whether it's starting a business, leaving a toxic relationship, or pursuing your passion, is neutral. It's your interpretation that gives it power. When I left my teaching position at St. John's University in 1974 to pursue my dream of reaching more people with my message, many people thought I was being irresponsible. They interpreted my decision through the lens of their own fears. But I had learned to interpret fear differently. I saw it as life's invitation to grow. Let me share with you the 4 questions I began asking myself whenever fear showed up in my life. I want you to write these down because they have the power to transform your relationship with fear forever. What am I actually afraid of? Not the surface fear, but the deep fear underneath it. Usually, you'll find it's not the action itself you fear, but what that action means about you. Is this fear protecting me or limiting me? Some fears are healthy. They keep us alive. But many fears are simply old programming that no longer serves us. But what was the cost of allowing this fear to make my decisions? Not just today, But a year from now, 5 years from now, at the end of your life? And fourth, this is the most powerful question. What would love do in this situation? Because love and fear cannot coexist in the same moment. When you choose love, love for yourself, love for others, love for your dreams, fear loses its grip. I remember counseling a young man in 1982. He had a secure job in his family's business, but his heart yearned to be a teacher. Every time he thought about making the change, fear would overwhelm him. What will my father think? How will I pay my bills? What if I'm not good enough? These were all valid concerns, but they weren't the real issue. The real issue was that he was letting fear interpret these questions for him. Fear always assumes the worst possible outcome. But what if we let love answer these questions instead? What would love say about disappointing his father? Perhaps that true love between parent and child can withstand honest differences in life choices. What would love say about financial security? Perhaps that following your heart's calling often leads to What would love say about not being good enough? Perhaps that our imperfect efforts to serve others are far more valuable than our perfect inaction. This young man eventually chose to listen to love instead of fear. Today he's been teaching for over 3 decades, touching countless lives. Not because he conquered his fear, but because he learned to interpret it differently. New opportunities aren't lacking in your life. They're present every single day. What's usually lacking is our willingness to walk through the door of fear to reach them. Think about the greatest opportunities in your own life. Didn't they all require you to step through some kind of fear? Getting married, having children, starting a new career, moving to a new city. These are all acts of faith that required us to walk through. The very things we fear often become the sources of our greatest joy and growth. The relationship you were afraid to start becomes your greatest love. The business you were afraid to launch becomes your path to freedom. The book you were afraid to write becomes someone else's inspiration. I've interviewed thousands of successful people over the years, and I've never met one who didn't feel fear. But I also never met one who let fear have the final say. They all learned to interpret fear as a signal to pay attention, not a command to read. You see, fear is like a guard dog. Its job is to alert you to potential danger. But just like a guard dog, fear can sometimes bark at shadows. It can mistake the mailman for an intruder. Our job isn't to kill the dog or to let it run the house. Our job is to train it, to teach it the difference between real threats and perceived ones. So how do we begin this training? How do we start reinterpreting our fears and opening ourselves to new opportunities? It starts with a simple but powerful shift in perspective. The shift I'm talking about is moving from seeing fear as something that happens to you to seeing it as something that happens for you. This isn't just wordplay, it's a fundamental change in how you relate to life itself. Let me give you a real example from my own journey. In 1975, I was invited to appear on the Today Show to talk about my first book. Now remember, this was long before social media and viral videos. The Today Show was one of the biggest platforms in America. The night before the appearance, I was gripped by such intense fear that I seriously considered calling in sick. But then I did something that changed everything. I sat down with my fear and had a conversation with it. Yes, you heard me right. A conversation. I asked my fear, what are you trying to tell me? What are you trying to protect me from? My fear wasn't trying to stop me from going on television. It was trying to make sure I was prepared. It was trying to ensure I honored this opportunity. Once I understood this, I could work with my fear instead of against it. The next morning, I didn't go on the Today Show fearless. I went prepared. And that appearance opened doors I never even knew existed. But here's the key point. The opportunity didn't come from conquering my fear. It came from understanding it and working with it. Now, I want everyone in this room to try something with me. Think about the biggest opportunity you're currently afraid to pursue. Got it in your mind? Good. Now, instead of trying to push that fear away, I want you to get curious about it. What is this fear trying to tell you? What is it trying to protect? What wisdom might it hold? Take a moment. Really sit with these questions. You see, fear is often our soul's way of saying this matters. We don't feel fear about things we don't care about. When was the last time you felt afraid about something meaningless? Fear shows up precisely because we're contemplating something. In my counseling practice years ago, I worked with a woman who had been in the same job for 18 years. She was miserable, but the thought of leaving terrified her. When we explored her fear together, we discovered something fascinating. But fear wasn't really about failing in a new career. It was about succeeding. Because if she succeeded, it would mean she had wasted 18 years in the wrong job. This revelation changed everything for her. Once she understood what her fear was really about, she could address the real issue. Not the fear of failure, but the fear of regret. And this understanding gave her the courage to make a change. Let me share with you 3 practical strategies I've developed over the years for working with fear rather than against. First, practice what I call fear scheduling. Instead of waiting until your fear goes away to take action, schedule your fear. Give it a specific time slot in your day. Say to yourself, from 3:30, I'm going to feel all my fear about this decision. Then at 3:30, I'm going to take one small action anyway. Second, use what I call the future self technique. Close your eyes and imagine yourself 1 year from now. Ask your future self what they wish you had done today. Fear lives in the present, but wisdom often comes from the future. Third, practice what I call fear gratitude. Each time fear shows up, thank it for caring about you enough to try to protect you. This simple act of gratitude can transform your relationship with fear from adversary to ally. These techniques aren't about eliminating fear. They're about changing your relationship with it. Because the goal isn't to become fearless. The goal is to fear less. Think about driving a car at night. The headlights don't illuminate the entire journey. They just show you the next 100 feet or so. But that's enough. You can make the entire journey that way, seeing just 100 feet at a time. Life works the same way. You don't need to see your entire path to take the next step. You just need enough light for the step you're taking right now. I remember counseling a writer in 1983 who was paralyzed by fear of criticism. She had a novel inside her, but was terrified of putting it out into the world. We worked together to break down her fear into smaller pieces. Instead of focusing on publishing a book, which felt overwhelming, we focused on writing 1 page a day. She made a commitment to write 1 page every morning, regardless of how she felt about it. Some days the fear was intense, some days it was barely noticeable, but she kept showing up 1 page at a time. 2 years later, she had a completed manuscript. More importantly, she had developed a new relationship with her fear. She had learned that fear could coexist with creative expression. It didn't have to stop it. This brings me to a crucial point about fear and opportunity. They're often a package deal. We want the opportunity without the fear, but life rarely works that way. The question isn't, how do I get rid of the fear? But rather, how do I move forward with the fear? Think about any significant achievement in your life. Chances are, fear was present at some point in the journey, but you moved forward anyway. Maybe you didn't feel ready. Maybe you didn't feel confident. But you took action despite those feelings. Courage is most people miss. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to take action in the presence of fear. Every person who has ever achieved something meaningful has felt fear. The difference is, they didn't let fear have the final vote. In my own life, every major breakthrough has come wrapped in fear. Every new book, every new speaking engagement, every new level of impact came with its own unique flavor of fear. But I've learned to see fear as a sign that I'm growing, that I'm pushing my boundaries, that I'm alive. When you begin to see fear this way, everything changes. Instead of asking, how can I get rid of this fear? You begin to ask, what is this fear trying to teach me? What opportunity is it pointing toward? Let me tell you something that might surprise you. The biggest opportunities in your life often come disguised as obstacles. They come wrapped in packages labeled impossible to risk or not the right time. But here's the truth I've learned over decades of working with people. The label on the package rarely matches the gift inside. Back in 1978, I was faced with what seemed like an impossible choice. My publisher wanted me to do a 30-city tour to promote my latest book. The idea terrified me. I was comfortable giving lectures in familiar places, but traveling across the country speaking to unknown audiences. My fear painted vivid pictures of empty rooms and hostile critics, but something inside me, call it intuition, call it divine guidance, call it what you will, whispered that this was more than just a book tour. It was an opportunity disguised as an obstacle. I said yes, and that decision changed everything. Not because every event was perfect. Some weren't. Not because every room was full. Some weren't. It changed everything because it showed me what was possible when I stopped letting fear make my decisions. During that tour, I met people who would become lifelong friends. I heard stories that would inspire future books. I discovered strengths I didn't know I had. But none of that would have happened if I had listened to my fear. Now, I want you to think about something in your own life that you've been labeling as an obstacle. Maybe it's a difficult conversation you need to have. Maybe it's a skill you need to learn. Maybe it's a change you need to make. What if, just for a moment, you could see it as an opportunity in disguise? Take a moment. Really think about it. You see, life has a wonderful way of preparing us for opportunities by first presenting us with challenges. Just like a muscle needs resistance to grow stronger, our spirit often needs challenges to grow wiser. Let me share with you what I call the 3 R's of opportunity recognition. First, there's reframe. This means looking at your situation from a different angle. When I was teaching at St. John's University, being asked to leave was initially seen as a disaster. But by reframing it, I saw it as an opportunity to finally pursue my true calling. Second, there's respond rather than react. When fear shows up, our first impulse is to react, to run, to hide, to protect ourselves. But if we can pause long enough to respond thoughtfully, we often see opportunities we missed in our initial. Third, there's remember your purpose. Every time I felt afraid during that book tour, I reminded myself why I was doing it. Not for my ego, but to serve others. When you connect with your purpose, fear loses much of its power. These aren't just theoretical concepts. They're practical tools that have helped thousands of people transform their relationship with fear and opportunity. Let me give you a recent example. In 1984, I worked with a man who had spent 20 years in corporate finance. He had a secure job, a good salary, and all the benefits you could want. But he was miserable. His real passion was teaching children with special. The very thought of leaving a secure job filled him with terror. He had a family to support, a mortgage to pay, responsibilities to meet. But instead of letting these fears stop him, he used the 3 R's. And he reframed his sub. He's seen it as risking everything. He saw it as investing in his purpose. He responded rather than react. Instead of immediately quitting his job, he began volunteering at a special needs school on weekends, gaining experience and confidence. Every time fear arose, he focused on the children he could help. Within a year, he had transitioned fully into special education. Was it scary? Absolutely. Was it worth it? He told me it was the best decision he ever made. It is what's crucial to understand. He didn't wait until he felt completely ready. He didn't wait until all his fears were gone. He simply began taking small steps in the direction of his dreams. This brings me to a vital truth about opportunities. It favors the prepared, but it doesn't require perfection. Too often, we wait until everything is perfect before we're willing to take a chance. We want all our fears resolved, all our doubts answered, all our questions settled. But life doesn't work that way. Life presents opportunities in the midst of our uncertainty. It offers chances while we're still afraid. It opens doors before we feel fully ready. The key is to understand that readiness is not a feeling, it's a decision. You decide to be ready by taking action, not by waiting until you feel ready. When I wrote my first book, I didn't feel ready. When I gave my first major speech, I didn't feel ready. When I left my secure teaching position to pursue my calling, I didn't feel ready. But I was ready, not because I felt it, but because I decided it. This is what I want you to really grasp. Your feelings about an opportunity and the actual opportunity are two separate things. Your feelings might be saying not yet, while the opportunity is saying right now. Fear will always try to convince you that you're not ready, that you need more preparation, more certainty, more guarantees, but opportunities don't come with guarantees. They come with possibilities. What if, just for today, you decided to be ready? What if you decided that your fear could come along for the ride, but it doesn't get to drive? What if you decided that being perfectly ready isn't nearly as important as being perfectly willing? Every person who has ever achieved something meaningful started before they felt ready. Every person who has ever embraced a life-changing opportunity did so while still feeling some fear. The difference between those who achieve their dreams and those who don't isn't the presence or absence of fear. It's their willingness to take action in the presence of fear. It's their ability to see opportunities where others see obstacles. And that ability isn't something you're born with. It's something you develop. Like a muscle, it grows stronger with use. Every time you take action despite your fear, you strengthen this muscle. Every time you reframe an obstacle as an opportunity, you enhance this ability. As we draw near the end of our time together, I want to share something profound with you. You see, we've been talking about fear and opportunity as if they're external forces in our lives, but the truth is they're both internal experiences shaped by one remarkable power. Every morning when you wake up, you make a choice. You choose what meaning to give to your fears. You choose what to do with the opportunities life presents. You choose whether to live from fear or from... But let me tell you about a letter I received in 1985 that changed how I think about choice. It was from a woman who had attended one of my lectures 5 years earlier. She wrote that on the day she came to my lecture, she had already decided to give up on her dream of becoming an artist. She was 52 years old, had never taken an art class, and felt it was too late. But something happened during that lecture. She realized that too late was not a fact. It was a choice. Being too old was not a reality. It was an interpretation. Her fear of failure was not a wall. It was a door she could choose to walk through. She made a different choice that day. Instead of choosing fear, she chose possibility. Instead of choosing too late, she chose just in time. She signed up for her first art class the very next day. The letter included a photograph of her first gallery showing. She wrote, "Dr. Dyer, I'm not writing to tell you I've become a famous artist. I'm writing to tell you I've become myself." That's what happens when we choose differently. We don't just change our circumstances, we change who we are. Now, I want you to think about the choices you've been making. Have you been choosing fear or possibility? Have you been choosing comfort or growth? Have you been choosing what's easy or what's true? Take a moment. Really sit with these questions. You see, the greatest power you have is not the power to eliminate fear. It's the power to choose your response to fear. It's not the power to create opportunities. It's the power to recognize and act on the opportunities that are already present. Let me share with you what I call the daily choice inventory. These are 5 questions I encourage you to ask yourself every morning. What am I choosing to believe about myself today? What am I choosing to see as possible today? What fear am I choosing to walk through today? What opportunity am I choosing to recognize today? What action am I choosing to take today? These questions aren't just philosophical exercises. They're practical tools for living. They remind us that our life is shaped not by what happens to us, but by the choices we make about what happens. I remember counseling a businessman in 1982 who was facing bankruptcy. He had lost everything in a failed venture, and his fear was paralyzing. But when we worked through these questions together, something shifted. He realized he wasn't choosing between success and failure. He was choosing between growth and stagnation. He chose growth. He chose to see his bankruptcy not as an ending, but as a beginning. He chose to view his fear not as a stop sign, but as a signal that he was on the edge of something important. Within 3 years, he had built a new business, one that aligned more closely with his values. He told me later that his bankruptcy was the best thing that ever happened to him, not because of what it took from him, but because of what it taught him about choice. You see, every experience in your life, every fear, every setback, every seeming obstacle is offering you a choice. You can choose to let it stop you, or you can choose to let it teach you. You can choose to let it frighten you, or you can choose to let it strengthen you. The choice is always yours, always. As we come to the close of our time together, I want to leave you with this truth. You are not your fear. You are the awareness that observes your fear. You are not your doubts. You are the consciousness that can choose how to respond to those doubts. And most importantly, you are not your past choices. You are the power to choose differently right now. Right now, in this moment, you can choose to see your fear as a teacher rather than a tormentor. Right now, you can choose to see obstacles as opportunities in disguise. Right now, you can choose to take one small step in the direction of your dreams. Remember the butterfly we talked about at the beginning? That struggle to emerge from its chrysalis wasn't just necessary, it was transformative. Your struggles with fear, your battles with doubt, your wrestling with uncertainty, these aren't just challenges to overcome. They're opportunities to become who you're meant to be. You don't have to make all the right choices. You don't have to be fearless. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing. Willing to feel the fear and choose anyway. Willing to face uncertainty and act anyway. Willing to embrace opportunity, even when it comes disguised as an obstacle. Because here's what I know for sure. So I know for sure the opportunities you're seeking are also seeking you. The dreams you're dreaming are also dreaming you. The life you're longing for is also longing for you. But you have to choose it. You have to choose it every day. In small ways and in big ways, you have to choose it, especially when fear tells you to choose something. As you leave here today, I want you to remember this. Your fear is not a statement about your limitations. It's an invitation to your possibilities. Your doubt is not a sign to retreat. It's a call to advance. And most importantly, your life is not happening to you. It's happening through the choices you make. Choose wisely. Choose courageously. Choose now. Thank you.